Welcome back. This is video 9 in the Mapping for Mature Bucks series, and today we're going to be talking about parallel ridge systems. For the parallel ridge system scenario, I decided to switch things up a bit. I picked out a spot that's nearly 1,200 miles from the original 58,000 acre piece that we e-scouted in videos 6, 7, and 8 in this series. I did this to illustrate more subtle hill country terrain where the change in elevation delta averages around 300 feet versus 1,000-foot elevation change like we saw in the previous videos. This chunk of private land is very close to several public hunting opportunities. It is around 1,196 acres, and it more closely resembles the smaller WMAs that are found in abundance, really, in many hill country states. When you study these maps and orbit a location, there's a lot of things that can be revealed. Parallel ridges, thermal hubs, bluffs, agriculture, and a lot of other things. And hopefully you can see these parallel ridges as they line up. On 31 October of 2020, I arrowed this buck on a parallel ridge system. My setup was at the top of a wishbone-shaped secondary ridge that paralleled ridges to the northeast and the southwest. Most of these ridges contained a scrape and some big rubs along the edges of the micro-drainages that helped me connect the dots between all of these parallel ridges. After mapping out the entire area on CalTopo during a 4-hour scouting mission the year before, I positioned 3 cameras in strategic locations at the top of this wishbone-shaped bridge so that I could maximize the number of deer that passed by this location. I let the camera soak on video mode for one entire season, only checking them once to change batteries in February, and you'd really be amazed at the number of deer 3 cameras will capture around a community scrape versus only having one there. During the scouting mission, this is the main deer trail that I was able to put together by kind of connecting all of these scrapes and also the micro drainages. The presence of old rubs and some pretty big new rubs is what sold me to want to hunt this location. My setup here was for a northwest wind, and this wishbone ridge worked out perfect so that my wind could blow down into that big ditch behind me. Also, the thermals could drop there in the morning. On the morning of the hunt, around 8:30, a couple of does came by. It was now 9:30, a full hour since the does had passed. And this lone 11-point buck came by following that trail the does had used, but he was about 15 yards on the downwind side and right along the top edge of the Y of the wishbone-shaped terrain feature I had my tree stand on. In video 2, I briefly discussed parcel data, which is available in CalTopo with the Pro version, but this is what it looks like when you have the parcel data turned on with boundaries only, no names, but you can turn on ownership data right over here. So here is our global imagery in CalTopo with a polygon drawn around our 1,200 acre example WMA that contains some really nice parallel ridge systems. About 5 miles to the north of this location, and it wraps back around to the west. 14 miles to the west of this location is a really big national forest, so I thought this would be a good piece of property to try to pick apart. And a lot of the WMAs in many, many different states, there's a lot of people that live right around the outskirts and edges of these wildlife management areas. So here we see there's a lot of ag here over to the east. All along the southern edge of the WMA is a lot of ag, and it actually runs up in here to the northeast on the western edge. And then up here at the top, it bends around the northern edge. So this is completely surrounded by ag. As I do in every area that I e-scout, I usually start with Google Earth and the historical layers. I also want to look at Onyx, Spartan Forge, and the global imagery layer in CalTopo to see what kind of clues the aerial photography and historical maps might provide. For example, by going back through the historical maps in Google Earth, I was able to see that logging began in this area in 2004 and continued through 2009. These older maps help you confirm where all the logging roads and logging decks are at. And via the LiDAR images in CalTopo, you can definitely see where the logging decks are. Aerial and both satellite and aerial imagery also reveal, the distant ag fields and which ones are active and which ones might be inactive or in CRP. All of this information is part of the puzzle and should be part of the overall strategy when deciding on where to direct your focus so that you're not wasting your time on areas where the concentration of deer is low versus where concentrations of deer are high. If I can avoid areas that are devoid of deer, then I'm saving valuable time determining where the best spots to hunt will be. These skinny parallel ridges or these parallel secondary ridges where three or more are parallel to each other can be great spots to target mature bucks during the rut. Mature bucks like to travel perpendicular to these parallel ridge systems when they're searching for the next doe that's nearing estrus. And most of the time, we can predetermine probable travel routes just from studying shaded relief with LiDAR and slope angle shading maps. I look for two or more drainages falling off one ridge with only one drainage going up the other side. Multiple drainages typically won't get you into the spot within a spot for a tree stand setup, but a single drainage opposite of multiple drainages running up next to the parallel ridge might be just what we're looking for, particularly if we can confirm the presence of big buck sign along the edge or in the bottom of this single drain. If historic rubs and new rubs can be found in areas like this, I prefer to hunt here versus down here where all these multiple drains are at. You might want to mark a few trees and hunt it during the pre-rut, the rut, or the post-rut, because bucks traveling long distances during the rut use these to get from one ridge to the next. I like to look for these southeast facing parallel ridge systems because the main ridge above will be orientated from the northeast to the southwest, and the parallel ridges will be orientated from the northwest to the southeast and dropping in elevation down to the ag or the creek bottoms, or in some cases, maybe a river system. These northwest winds are common during the rut, and a southeast facing parallel ridge is great for mature bucks to efficiently check for does. They're also good for the hunter if you choose, the right stand location. And we'll talk more about that here in a few minutes. But bucks traveling perpendicular to long skinny ridges, they can cut the wind of doe groups up and down the spines of these skinny parallel ridges, as well as those does that choose to travel along the main ridge above. And the formula for multi-year success in parallel ridge systems is much like that of a thermal hub, a topo hub, or connecting drainages. You need to be able to find enough deer sign to say that it's something that you got confidence in hunting. And the presence of multiple scrapes on one, two, or even all of the ridges, if we're lucky, paralleling each other, combined with big rubs, which I've talked about before, both old and new rubs dropping off the spine of one ridge and into the drainage and then back up the side to the next ridge, and it continues on to the third ridge. And when I see this, I start to get excited. Now let's take a look at CalTopo in this 1,200 acre WMA scenario in hill country. To summarize my process, I start with the aerial maps and I look for, logging, and I want to know if there's, timber in different ages of growth around here, like some overgrown logging deck. Logging took place and ended in 2009, so we're at the 15-year mark right now. It should be some pretty thick areas in there, but we draw out all of the logging roads, and that way we know where, people are going to access. Like there's a parking lot down here, probably another one here, and most of these WMAs have 2 to 3 entrances. The logging roads, follow the ridges, so it makes it easy to see that these are parallel ridges running down through here. And I've taken the time to kind of go map some things out that I kind of want to go over in this video today so that we can see how we can prepare ourselves before we even go into the woods just by topography and different things like slope angle shading. We also know that, in these steeper areas, bucks like to bed with the wind at their back looking down the hill, and then they can drop off over into, thermal hubs. And so what I wanted to say about this is, most ridge spines will always have a doe trail. And then if you've got a thermal hub, these, mini spines that run down here along the edges of these drainages, these micro drainages that run down into here, there's usually trails that go down the edges of these micro drainages. And how we can guess where these trails might be so that when we go in to actually put boots on the ground, we're not, spending time looking for these things. We're just going to verify the existence of them or not, and then we delete them off the map if it's not true, and we leave it on the map if it is. But you can see some LiDAR. I purposely put this trail just to the right hand side of where this LiDAR comes down here, but this is a good indicator of either a skidder road or a historical deer trail. But they all drop down into this thermal hub. And another good indicator other than LiDAR is just this, the terrain and how it's steep right here, it's steep right over here, and there's likely a deer trail right through that gap right there where it's green. And the same goes for, on this side. Deer prefer to avoid these steeper areas if they can, so that's why their trails are usually around the edges of them in the more green and white tinted parts of our map. And down here in this creek bottom, as we talked about in this video series, we're going to want to go look at all these little flat spots to see where that primary scrape is down here, because if there's a lot of deer in this area, there's probably going to be a scrape down here, and I would suggest it would probably be on this flat or on this flat. But where do the deer go up the other side? Well, they're probably not going to go up through here unless they're being run by squirrel hunters or something. They'll take this path of least resistance and go right up through here. Now if we back this up, it's typical for a thermal hub to have, some sort of bedding up in here. Like doe bedding is usually up on this middle spine a lot of times. And the bucks, they'll bed on the back side of these hills with that northwest wind, or they might just be right over the edge of a mini spine that goes up right here. So I put this question mark down here because I want to go look at this when I get boots on the ground to see if there's a trail running down through here or a trail coming off the edge of this. And then I'm going to want to walk up the side of this micro drainage and check this area real good for beds or, blowdowns, especially if there's a blowdown, there's likely a bed up there. And then I'll walk back down the other side. But I put the question mark there just to help me remember when I get, boots on the ground. I'll go to this spot right here and check it out and confirm whether these trails exist or whether they don't. There might be a trail that comes up this real steep side over here, because that's really steep stuff. And, humans and deer alike will avoid that stuff if they can. Really, this is a thermal hub, but for this drainage, what I can see on the map is there's probably going to be likely a trail going up one side or the other, or even in the middle. The does will travel right up the middle down here, or maybe there's a trail up here and maybe there's a trail down here. But once you get boots on the ground, you can see where the biggest sign, where all the old rubs are, because the bucks will tend to, gravitate towards the edges of these micro drainages. There might be a trail that goes right up the edge of here, but to get from, this main ridge down through this bottom and back up over the top of this ridge, we can look at the map and kind of give ourselves a leg up, if you will, before we even do boots on the ground scouting as to where these deer are likely going to be traveling. So, for example, if the buck, sign comes out of this hub right here along this trail, it's a pretty good. There's pretty good odds that it's going to get right over here as soon as it can to the edge of this ditch, and then follow this ditch or micro drainage, whatever you like to call them, on his way down to get to this next drain. And that's what we're going to do now is, look at this next drain. The overall strategy is to pick the best place to sit among all of these different parallel ridges, because we already know just from, being a good hunter, being a good woodsman, whatever, that deer will travel perpendicular to these parallel ridges. And we need to figure out, where that particular buck that uses this area regularly might travel. And then in the rut, bucks that come from like 1, 2, or 5 miles away, they'll end up usually following the trails that the local bucks travel to get, from one ridge to the next ridge through the next bottom and so on, because their noses are so good they pick up on the rubs and the scrapes and the scent that's been left behind. Picture, at least from a e-scouting perspective, starts to come into view when you start to put these different drainages together, because the tendencies are pretty easy to see on a map. And what we are able to do is put one drainage connected to the second drainage, connected to the third drainage, and so on and so forth, so that when we go in to scout, we're making the best use of our time, and we can just go straight to these spots to see if, the amount of sign that we're looking for is there or not. I'm going to zoom back in on this second drainage right here, and there's a couple things that, I can see right off the bat. And one is that the upper part of the drain has a lot of steep stuff. And this potentially could be, the home of a big deer, at least if, based on what I've seen over the years. There's some other stuff over here that's kind of steep that might be worth looking at later. But since we're just talking about these parallel ridge systems, this area here, when I go in, I definitely want to start, if I'm moving from one drain to the next, I'm going to start by walking the very top edge of where the reds and the yellows meet the darker greens. And I'll just walk this whole edge down, and I'll look up the hill and I'll look down the hill, as I make my way down through here, looking for rubs and beds and, thickets and white oaks and red oaks and all the other things that we look for. But one of the things that I like about this, even though we came from this thermal hub to move over to this here, I'm going to want to look at this area right in here. And particularly, if a big buck is traveling down through here, where is he going to cross? Well, he probably won't cross right here. Now, he might, but most of the time they're going to go up this less steep stuff and probably right around the edge of this drainage right here. Or it might be that, he walks this little faint drainage down through here and crosses right here. But, I'm going to put a question mark here. I'm going to put a question mark here. I can go ahead and do that actually. All right, so the next thing is, where else on this drain might, a deer travel? And I already put a red dot up here because, in the previous part of the video, I was talking about 4 or 5 little micro drainages coming down in one spot, and then only having one micro drainage on the other side. So, whether the deer is a local deer or not, he's going to tend to gravitate towards one of these drains or another. But, during the rut, one buck one day might come down here and one buck the next day may come down here. But the key is to look for these in areas where there's only one drain going up the other side, because if you can put yourself over here, you just kind of multiplied the number of chances that you would have compared to if you had tried to guess at which one of these drains a deer might come down. So, doesn't matter if he comes down here or if he comes down over here, he's going to gravitate to this drain right here, particularly because it's so steep right here. He probably, if he's not pressured and if he hasn't smelled danger, he's not going to just go climb this because he's, tough. He's going to go over here and he's going to slide right up through here, and he's probably going to follow that drain right on up. Go ahead and change our red dot to a question mark. And I'll show you how I put these things together in just a little bit. So I'm going to zoom out. And the other thing is there's an overgrown field up here that we found when we were looking on our aerial photos. So I want to definitely go take a look around this field and then, come down to where it starts to get steep at, and then follow the edge down here. Even though it is yellow right here, there's likely a deer trail down through here. So I'm going to want to go, look at that, and then also to connect from our thermal hub exactly where the big buck sign is. Is it going up this drain? Is it up this drain, or is it even further down this drain? But somewhere along here, combined with this spot up here, you're probably going to find, hopefully some big rubs. And again, if you're not getting enough sign, then move on to another area. And that, I don't want to get too far off track, but I think you'll follow me. I also put a couple of X marks in here above this thermal hub. I did that because I've spoke about it before, but I don't like these V-shaped bottoms where, it's less than 50 yards across. It's just really, really tough to hunt down in there. It needs to be wider if I'm going to hunt a thermal hub, a wind that's blowing down the length of it. So this drainage, this is a spot we're going to check out. We're going to check this out. We're going to walk all of these drains over here and pay attention to the top of this drain, the sides of this drain, and the tops of these to see where the trail is. We're going to look for a trail here, a trail up this drain, and a trail down this drain. And by the time you get over here to this next spot, the picture should be becoming more clear to you, especially for mature buck travel. The sign's going to be there, the rubs are going to be there, they're going to connect to scrapes that are up on the tops of the ridges, or maybe around, these overgrown fields, or, a lot of times there's a lot of food in these green spots. So we're going to walk them, and then we'll go down the side of this drain and back up this side, and then we'll go over here and we'll go down this drain and then back up this side. And we're going to make note of all the old rubs and all the new rubs. And I put 2 red dots down in here because what we don't know is, from an e-scouting perspective, is which one of these drains right up through here do the deer tend to gravitate to. The most rubs are coming down through here. They'll likely continue down, and meet up here. Or he may go up this side and cross over here. So we want to go figure that out. I just like the way that this sets up. It's really steep up here. It's really steep down here. Steep in the middle a little bit. So usually when there's a gap, you're going to find the buck sign in one of these gaps somewhere. And you just have to spend the time looking to, put all these pieces together. But, by the time you get through, this is a mile or more, you're going to zoom back out and, just for the purposes of this video, and you find a lot of rubs going up here, they'll generally fall off the other side. They'll cross in these spots that are predictable because it's so steep up here. There's probably going to be a crossing right here. So you can put all of these dots together in some fashion. Then you can narrow down exactly where the best places to hunt are at. I would put a stand right here with a northwest wind, or maybe even a north wind if I had a lot of big rubs going up here and going out here. This is a spot that you can sit for a couple of days and you won't see anything. But when you do, it's going to be a mature buck, and it's just based on how they like to travel. The spot that works best for me, but it also works good for him. And that's why with a northwest wind, I'd kind of put my stand right in here somewhere. Been down through a few of these drainages and sort of mapped everything out. This picture will start to develop because you'll have rub, you'll have your trail marked, you'll have your scrapes. You'll know exactly where all of the crossings are. Sometimes I'll put a circle C down here if there's a really big creek crossing. But you just follow the rubs, and then you should have, after you've spent a good deal of time in here trying to figure things out, how everything starts to come together with the rubs and the scrapes. And then you can start to really nail down where you want to hunt. You might not be able to hunt this thermal hub because the wind or the thermals aren't exactly right, but as a backup plan, and especially during the rut, because a lot of times I won't hunt these parallel ridge systems until the rut gets after the peak breeding phase has started. I will start to move into areas like this to try to catch those long distance bucks that are traveling looking for the next doe. But hopefully this video has shown you that you can go down in here on your map and really zoom in to say, good chance that he's not going to be walking up and down this steep stuff. But you can say, I can go look at this spot right here, and I can look at these drainages on this side and go up to the top of this drainage, and pretty quickly I can tell whether there's enough sign in there that it's part of the overall puzzle where these mature bucks are traveling during the rut or not. And if it's not, you can just either leave it blank, or I usually leave mine blank, but you could put a circle X right there saying, I'm not going back there because there wasn't enough sign. Maybe the sign was actually down here and the long distance trail was, running right along the edge of the backside of this overgrown field and then going over to this grown up logging deck or something. But just put the pieces together on the map of what you think, and then go spend some quality time in the woods and draw you'll end up having a map that looks like the deer are traveling and using it, and you can pick your hunting spots out based on that. So if you like this video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel and share it with your buddies, and I'll see you next time.